Imagine you are a newly independent country. It's 1965. You just broke free from a colonial empire. Your people are celebrating in the streets. You finally have your own flag, your own government, your own future. And then, a man in a suit flies in from Washington. He sits across from your new president. He smiles. He slides a document across the table. We'd like to offer you a loan. That loan will take 40 years to repay. And by the time you're done paying, your country won't really be yours anymore. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Let's go back to 1945. World War II is over, and the world is in ruins. Europe, flattened. Japan, devastated. Britain, technically a winner, but completely broke. The old colonial powers, Britain, France, the Netherlands, they had built their empires on raw military force, on guns and ships and occupation. But that model was dying. The world was tired of it, and the old empires were too exhausted to hold their colonies together anyway. But here's the critical question nobody asks. When old empires collapse, who fills the vacuum? The United States of America came out of World War II as the only major power that wasn't bombed back to the Stone Age. Its factories were intact. Its military was the strongest on Earth. And most importantly, it had the gold. At the end of World War II, the United States held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. 2/3. Let that sink in. Every other country on Earth was starting from zero or below zero. America was starting from the top of the mountain. And in July 1944, before the war was even over, America called a meeting. Not a peace conference, not a military summit, a financial conference. 44 countries sent their delegates to a resort hotel in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, and over 3 weeks, America essentially rewrote the rules of global money. This is where the real story begins. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944 did 3 things. Number 1, it pegged the US dollar to gold. 1 ounce of gold equaled $35, fixed, no exceptions. Number 2, it pegged every other currency to the US dollar, which meant the dollar was now the backbone of the entire global economy. Number 3, it created 2 brand new institutions, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. On paper, these sounded like noble ideas. The IMF would stabilize currencies during financial crises. The World Bank would fund development in poor nations, peace through prosperity. That was the pitch. Look at where both institutions were headquartered. Washington, D.C. Look at who controlled the largest voting share in both institutions. The United States. This wasn't altruism. This was architecture. America had just designed a global financial system where every transaction, every loan, every currency exchange flowed through institutions that it controlled. Now, here's what most history books skip. At Bretton Woods, there was another proposal on the table. A British economist named John Maynard Keynes, arguably the most brilliant economic mind of the 20th century, had a completely different idea. He wanted to create a new global reserve currency, not the dollar, not the pound, something neutral. He called it the Bancor. Under the Bancor system, no single country would control global money. Trade imbalances would be automatically corrected. Surplus countries would actually be penalized for hoarding too much wealth. It would have been genuinely fair. The Americans shot it down immediately. Why would they accept fairness when they could have dominance? Keynes left Bretton Woods frustrated and ill. He died less than 2 years later, and his Bancor system was buried with him. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, and America's blueprint for financial empire was now fully operational. Now, before we go further, I know what some of you are thinking. But what about the Marshall Plan? America gave billions to rebuild Europe. That's the opposite of exploitation. Fair point. Let's talk about the Marshall Plan honestly. In 1948, the United States committed $13 billion, about $150 billion in today's money, to rebuild Western Europe. It was genuinely one of the most remarkable foreign aid programs in history. But here's the part they don't teach you in school. Almost every dollar of that aid came with conditions. European countries receiving Marshall Plan money were required to open their markets to American goods. They had to reduce trade barriers. They had to accept American investment. So yes, America rebuilt Europe. And in exchange, Europe became America's largest export market. Generosity and strategy are not mutually exclusive. The Marshall Plan was both. And understanding that is key to understanding everything that comes after. Because by 1950, the Cold War was heating up, and America needed to make a choice. Let developing nations stay poor and vulnerable to Soviet influence, or bring them into the dollar system? The answer was obvious. Across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, dozens of countries were gaining independence from European colonial empires. They were poor, they needed infrastructure, they needed hospitals, roads, power plants, they needed money. And America, through the World Bank and bilateral loans, was very, very happy to provide it. But here's where things took a very dark turn. Here is how it worked, and I want you to pay close attention, because this pattern repeated itself in country after country after country for 3 decades. Step 1. The offer. A developing country, let's say Ghana or Indonesia or Ecuador, needs infrastructure. The World Bank or the US government offers a massive loan. The interest rates look manageable, the project looks transformative. The local leader signs. Step 2. The condition. The loan comes with strings. The money must be spent hiring American engineering firms, American construction companies, American consultants. So the loan leaves the country almost immediately, flowing back to American corporations. Step 3. The project. The infrastructure gets built. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's a giant dam that floods farmland and displaces thousands of people but conveniently generates electricity for a foreign-owned mine. The people of the country rarely benefit as much as the press releases suggest. Step 4. The debt. Now the country owes the money back, with interest, in dollars, not in their own currency. This is critical. If they want to pay back the debt, they have to earn dollars, which means they have to export to earn hard currency, which means they have to focus their economy on whatever the global market wants. Usually raw commodities, oil, copper, cocoa, coffee, not finished goods, not technology, raw materials, which is exactly what colonial empires used to extract by force. Except now, nobody has a gun to your head. You signed a contract. Step 5. The crisis. Then commodity prices crash, as they always eventually do. The country's export revenue collapses. But the debt payments don't stop. The country can't pay. And that's when the IMF shows up. The IMF arrives with an emergency bailout. But to receive it, the country must implement what are called structural adjustment programs, or APs. And what do APs require? Cut government spending, privatize state-owned companies, open up to foreign investment, reduce import tariffs, and keep paying the debt. Sound familiar? Cut public services. Sell off national assets to foreign buyers. Open your markets. Keep paying. This is financial colonialism, and it happened not in 1 or 2 cases, but in dozens of countries across 3 continents, from the 1960s through the 1990s. John Perkins, a former economic consultant who worked in this system, later wrote a book admitting exactly how it worked. He called himself an economic hitman. His job was to produce inflated economic growth projections that would justify massive loans that he knew these countries could never fully repay. He has said publicly, on the record, that this was deliberate policy. This was the system working as designed. But the story gets even bigger, because in 1971, something happened that should have destroyed the entire dollar system. And instead, it made America more powerful than ever. By 1971, the United States had been running massive deficits. The Vietnam War was bleeding the treasury dry, and countries, particularly France under Charles de Gaulle, had started doing something perfectly legal under Bretton Woods. They were exchanging their dollars for gold, the actual gold, from Fort Knox. De Gaulle famously sent a battleship to New York to collect France's gold. He knew the game. America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back. The whole system was a lie. On August 15, 1971, Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold, just like that, unilaterally, with no consultation. The Bretton Woods system was dead. Every economic textbook will tell you this was a crisis. And it was, for about 3 years. The dollar fell, inflation spiked globally, chaos, but then a deal was made. A deal so consequential that it still shapes the world today. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, flew to Saudi Arabia, and between 1972 and 1974, he negotiated one of the most important secret agreements in modern history. The Saudis, and eventually the entire OPEC cartel, agreed to price all oil sales exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, America would provide Saudi Arabia with military protection and weapons. Think about what this meant. Before 1971, the dollar was backed by gold, After 1974, the dollar was backed by oil, the one commodity that every single nation on Earth needs to run its economy. If you are Japan, you need to buy oil. Oil is priced in dollars, so you need to hold dollars. And to hold dollars, you need to send America something valuable: your goods, your services, your exports. In exchange for paper, America had found something better than gold. It had found a permanent, self-reinforcing global demand for its currency. The petrodollar system meant that American deficit spending was now subsidized by the entire world. Every country, every year, had to accumulate dollar reserves, which meant they had to effectively lend money to the United States by buying U.S. Treasury bonds. America could now run deficits forever, and the rest of the world would finance them, because they had no choice. This is the mechanism, this is the engine, and it is still running today. Let me show you 3 quick case studies so this stops being abstract and becomes real. Ecuador. In the 1970s, Ecuador discovered massive oil reserves. The World Bank and American banks rushed in with loans. Ecuador borrowed heavily to develop the oil sector. By 1980, debt payments were consuming over 50% of the national budget. The country had to cut education, healthcare, infrastructure. The oil wealth flowed to debt servicing, while American oil companies extracted the crude. Jamaica. In the 1970s, Jamaica tried to nationalize its bauxite industry to keep more profit for its own people. The IMF and international lenders responded with financial pressure. By the 1980s, Jamaica was forced into structural adjustment. It cut public spending, privatized industries, and opened its markets. The result was rising unemployment, falling wages, and a brain drain that Jamaica is still recovering from decades later. And then there's Iraq, a different kind of lesson. Here's a case study that isn't about a loan, but about what happens when a country rejects the dollar system entirely. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced that Iraq would start selling its oil in euros instead of dollars. It was a direct challenge to the petrodollar system. 3 years later, the United States invaded Iraq. I am not saying the Iraq War happened only because of oil currency. There were many factors, but I am saying the timing is not a coincidence that any serious analyst ignores. When Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency to replace the dollar in African oil trade, a currency that would have allowed African nations to break free from dollar dependency, his country was destabilized and he was killed in 2011. Again, multiple factors. But the pattern holds. The system defends itself. Here's the key lesson of this entire video. Write it down if you need to. The most powerful empires in history don't always use armies. They use the architecture of the financial system. When Britain colonized India, they needed soldiers and ships. When America built its empire, it needed economists, loan agreements, and reserve currency status. The genius and the horror of it is that it's invisible to most people, because it doesn't look like occupation. It looks like development aid. It looks like financial assistance. It looks like stability. But ask the people of Ecuador. Ask the people of Jamaica. Ask the people of dozens of countries whose resources were extracted, whose leaders were pressured, and whose debt payments enriched foreign banks for generations. They'll tell you what it felt like. Now, here's the question I want to leave you with. China is now doing something that looks remarkably familiar: infrastructure loans to developing nations, projects built by Chinese companies, debt denominated in yuan, strategic access to ports and resources, a new empire building its financial architecture, one loan at a time. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is, will the new system be any better for the people at the bottom of it? If this video changed the way you see the world, even slightly, then this channel is doing its job. Most people consume financial news like it's sports scores, numbers going up, numbers going down. They never ask why the system is built the way it is, or who it was built to serve. That's what Finance Historian is here to answer. Every week, we go back to the origins, the decisions, the deals, the power plays that created the financial world you live in right now. Because you cannot understand where you are until you understand how you got here. If that's the kind of knowledge you want, subscribe. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because this community is genuinely one of the few places on the internet where financial history is treated with the seriousness it deserves.